The human technician stood in the shadow of a towering alien ship, its metal hull scarred from battle. It had been a long journey to reach this desolate moon, and the ship's systems had failed under the stress of combat. His task was clear: repair the ship and get it operational again. His name was Ryan, a skilled technician with a reputation for being able to fix anything. But this wasn't a simple repair job. The ship he was about to work on was unlike any human-made craft he'd ever encountered. The alien technology was complex, and every piece of equipment felt like it belonged to a different world, one where logic and reason were far different from Earth's. Ryan surveyed the wreckage. The ship had taken heavy fire, and pieces of its hull were cracked and twisted. The large engines at the back were damaged beyond belief, and the control room seemed to be a mess of wires, buttons, and glowing lights that he couldn't even begin to understand. But Ryan was determined. He had been brought here for one reason: to fix it. He adjusted his tools and moved toward the ship's lower maintenance hatch. As he did, he noticed someone watching him from the ship's doorway. She stood there silently, her presence commanding attention. She was tall, with long, flowing hair that shimmered silver in the dim light. Her eyes, a deep shade of violet, seemed to study him carefully. She was an alien, a member of a species Ryan had only heard about in stories. Her skin had an ethereal glow, a soft, almost iridescent hue that made her look like she belonged to another world entirely. Ryan paused for a moment, trying not to let his nerves show. He wasn't used to being in the presence of such otherworldly beings. Yet, here he was, alone with an alien captain, on a foreign ship in the middle of nowhere. The woman didn't speak, but her gaze followed his every movement as he prepared his tools. She seemed to be waiting for him to make the first move, but he didn't know what to say. So he simply nodded toward the entrance of the ship and began his work. "Don't take too long," she said suddenly, her voice a calm, smooth whisper. "We need the ship operational soon." Ryan looked up, surprised by her words. She was direct, without any small talk, a sharp contrast to the polite formalities he was used to back home. "I'll work as fast as I can," he replied, though he knew the job would take time. This wasn't something that could be rushed. Every system needed careful attention to avoid further damage. He made his way into the ship's heart, the engine room. The room was massive, with pulsating blue lights and walls lined with unfamiliar equipment. The hum of energy running through the ship made the air feel alive, but Ryan wasn't distracted. He had a job to do. As he crouched down to examine the first of many systems that needed repairs, he could feel the alien captain's eyes on him. Her presence was unsettling, but he focused on the task at hand. The engines were complicated, designed with alien technology that he had never seen before. Some parts seemed to be in perfect condition, while others were on the verge of failure. It was a puzzle, and Ryan loved puzzles. He reached for his toolkit, carefully removing a damaged circuit board and replacing it with a new one. His hands moved with practiced ease, but his mind couldn't help but wander back to the woman. There was something about her. She wasn't like the other beings he had encountered on his travels. She wasn't threatening or cold, but there was an intensity in the way she watched him, a quiet expectation that made him feel as though every move he made was being scrutinized. As he worked, he could hear the sound of her footsteps behind him. She hadn't moved far from the entrance. Her gaze never wavered, though she didn't speak again. The silence between them grew heavy, but Ryan couldn't bring himself to break it. He didn't want to risk saying the wrong thing. Minutes passed, then hours. The work was difficult, and the alien technology was proving to be more challenging than he had expected. But Ryan was determined. He knew that if he didn't get the ship working again, the crew would be stranded on this dead moon, far from help. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the engine room was almost done. The last of the wiring was in place, and Ryan was checking the final connections when the alien captain stepped closer. "Is it fixed?" she asked, her voice calm but with a hint of urgency. Ryan stepped back and surveyed the room. The systems were stable, but he wanted to be sure before he gave her an answer. "Not yet," he said. "I still need to run some tests, The repairs are only half done. The captain didn't argue. Instead, she nodded, as if accepting that Ryan knew what he was doing. But she didn't leave. She stayed by his side, watching him work. Ryan felt a flicker of something odd inside him. There was a tension between them, an unspoken understanding. He couldn't explain it, but it was there. She was an alien, someone from another world, and yet there was something familiar about her, something he couldn't put his finger on. "Why are you taking so long?" she asked after a while, breaking the silence again. "We don't have much time." Ryan paused, his hands frozen on the control panel. There was something about the way she spoke that was different from the others he had encountered. It wasn't impatience, but something else, something softer. "I'm being careful," he replied, looking up at her. "If I rush, I might make things worse." She watched him for a long moment, her eyes unreadable. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "Why are you so gentle?" Ryan blinked, caught off guard by her question. It wasn't the kind of question he was used to hearing. The way she asked it, so quietly, almost like a secret, made his heart race for reasons he couldn't explain. "I don't know," he said, unsure of how to respond. "It's just the way I am." The captain didn't answer right away. She seemed to be deep in thought, her gaze fixed on him, as if searching for something in his eyes. After a long silence, she nodded and stepped back, allowing him to continue his work. Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that her question was more than just a passing thought. It lingered in his mind, and he couldn't help but wonder if she knew something about him that he didn't. But there was no time to dwell on it. The repairs were still far from complete, and there was much work left to be done. He had a ship to fix, and that was his only focus. For now. Ryan worked diligently, his tools moving quickly as he carefully reconnected wires and adjusted the ship's systems. The engine room, now mostly repaired, hummed with power once again, but there was still much to do. The alien technology, though, fascinating, was unlike anything he had ever worked with before. Some systems seemed to repair themselves, while others required delicate, precise adjustments. The quiet hum of the ship's machinery was almost soothing, but there was no time to relax. He was determined to finish the repairs and get the ship back into working condition. But the presence of the alien captain lingered in his thoughts. She hadn't left since their first encounter. She stood in the shadows of the room watching him intently. Her eyes, a deep shade of violet, never left him as he worked, her expression unreadable. Ryan could feel her gaze on him even when he didn't look directly at her. It was as though she were studying him, analyzing every movement. "Are you going to stand there all day?" Ryan asked, his voice breaking the silence. He didn't mean to sound rude, but her constant presence was starting to make him feel uneasy. The captain tilted her head slightly, her long silver hair shifting in the low light. "I'm not the one who's taking so long," she said calmly, her voice still as smooth as silk. Ryan paused, the words stinging a little more than he expected. He had been working for hours, trying to fix a ship that seemed determined to resist. His every effort. But she was right. There was something about her presence that made everything feel more intense. He quickly shook off the feeling and returned to his work. The faster he finished, the faster he could leave the tense atmosphere between them behind. "I'm almost done," Ryan said, though he knew it would take at least another few hours. The captain didn't respond, but continued to watch him silently. It was a strange kind of silence, heavy, like there was something unsaid between them, something that neither of them was willing to acknowledge. Ryan couldn't help but wonder about the captain. She was the leader of the alien crew, a being far more powerful and ancient than him, yet she seemed so human in certain moments. There was a vulnerability to her that he couldn't quite place. It was there in the way she observed him, as though she was waiting for something he didn't understand. The silence continued for a while until she spoke again, her voice softer this time. "You don't act like the others," she said, almost as if she were speaking to herself. Ryan glanced up, surprised by the sudden change in her tone. "What do you mean?" he asked, setting his tools down for a moment to face her. She took a step closer, her violet eyes never leaving his. The others who've tried to repair this ship, they were quick, efficient. They didn't waste time on anything unnecessary. Her gaze flickered to the damaged sections of the ship, her expression unreadable. But you take your time. You're gentle with it. You care. Ryan's chest tightened. There it was again. That word, gentle. He didn't know why, but every time she said it, it felt like it carried more weight than it should. He wasn't sure why, but her observations made him feel both seen and exposed at the same time. I'm just doing my job, Ryan said, shrugging, trying to play it off as nothing more than routine. But inside he felt a wave of uncertainty. Was it really just about doing the job? Or was there something more he was avoiding? She seemed to study him for a long moment, her face serious, yet strangely soft. Finally she nodded, as if satisfied, with his answer. You don't need to pretend, she said quietly, almost as if she were speaking to herself again. Not to me. Ryan swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. It wasn't that he was pretending. He was just focused on the task at hand. He didn't want to deal with any distractions, especially when dealing with alien technology that could easily be ruined by a single wrong move. But the way she spoke made him feel as though he was being drawn into something deeper, something he wasn't ready for. All right, let's finish this, Ryan said, trying to change the subject. He didn't know why, but he suddenly felt a sense of urgency, a need to wrap up the repairs as quickly as possible. The captain's presence was starting to feel less like an observation and more like an interrogation, and Ryan didn't know if he was ready for whatever it was she wanted from him. The captain stepped back, allowing him space to continue. She didn't speak again, but Ryan could still feel her eyes on him, watching his every move. It was a strange feeling, as though every decision he made, every move he took was being silently judged. But it wasn't a harsh judgment. It was more like she was looking for something. But what? Ryan shook off the unsettling feeling and focused on his task. He was getting closer to finishing the repairs, and soon he could leave this alien ship behind. But as he worked, his mind kept drifting back to the captain. He couldn't help but wonder what she was thinking. Why had she stayed with him all this time? Was it just to oversee the repairs, or was there something more to it? After a few more hours, Ryan finally managed to stabilize the ship's main power systems. The ship flickered back to life, its engines beginning to hum steadily, and the lights overhead glowed brighter. Ryan stepped back, wiping the sweat from his brow. He felt a sense of accomplishment. The job was almost done. But as he turned to the captain, he found her standing just a few feet away. She was closer than before, her presence overwhelming. "You've done well," she said, her voice low, but still carrying that quiet intensity. Ryan met her gaze, his heart pounding in his chest. There was something in the way she spoke, something in her eyes that made him feel as though he were standing on the edge of a cliff, but he couldn't tell if it was fear or something else entirely. Before he could respond, she took another step forward, her gaze intense. I think you understand this ship better than anyone else." Ryan wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a warning. All he knew was that, in this moment, there was no escape. There was only her, and the questions that had been swirling in his mind ever since he laid eyes on her. Ryan stood in the heart of the alien ship, feeling the hum of the restored power systems beneath his feet. The ship was alive again, but something didn't sit right with him. The work he had done was nearly complete, but there was one last task. The ship's core needed to be stabilized, or else it could cause catastrophic damage to the entire vessel. The power core was located deep inside the ship, and it had been damaged during the battle that had left the ship stranded. The core was the heart of the ship, its energy source, and without it, the ship wouldn't be able to function. The problem was that Ryan had noticed something while working on the repairs, something he hadn't seen before. There was a hidden flaw in the core's system, one that had been covered up by the damage from the battle. It was subtle, easy to miss, but Ryan's keen eye had spotted it. If it wasn't fixed, the ship would never make it out of this moon's orbit. It would be trapped here forever, unable to continue its journey. The problem was that Ryan wasn't sure if he should tell the captain. He had already worked on the ship for hours, and the captain had been watching him closely the entire time. She had been silent for much of the repairs, but he could feel her presence like a shadow, always, lingering just out of his sight. Every time he turned around, she was there, her violet eyes studying him, waiting for something. What exactly, he wasn't sure. He glanced up at the captain, who stood in the doorway, watching him from a distance. There was something about her that was both calming and unsettling at the same time. She was an alien, powerful and distant, yet her presence seemed to draw him in. The way she had been so gentle with him earlier had left him wondering if there was something more to their relationship, something beyond the repairs. But now, with the flaw in the core's system staring him in the face, Ryan couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. The flaw was dangerous, and if it wasn't fixed, the ship would be doomed. He couldn't ignore it, but at the same time, he wasn't sure how the captain would react if he told her the truth. He ran his fingers over the delicate components of the core, feeling the heat emanating from the system. The flaw was small, but it was enough to cause a chain reaction that could disable the entire ship. Ryan took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He had to fix it, but he had to do it carefully. The captain didn't move. She remained where she stood, watching him with those piercing violet eyes. It felt as though she was waiting for him to make a decision, and he wasn't sure what that decision would be. Ryan made up his mind. He couldn't let the ship fail, no matter what the captain thought. He had to fix it, even if it meant doing it without her knowing. He didn't want to worry her unnecessarily, and he certainly didn't want to risk angering her. He turned back to the core, his mind focused on the task ahead. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the machinery and the occasional clicking sound of his tools. As he worked, the captain's presence weighed on him. She was still there, her eyes never leaving him. It was almost as if she could sense his hesitation, feel the tension in the air. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke. "Is there something wrong with the core?" Her voice was soft, but Ryan could hear the hint of concern in her words. Ryan froze. He hadn't expected her to ask. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. Should he lie? Should he tell her the truth? I noticed a small flaw in the system, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. It's nothing major, but if it's not fixed, it could cause some problems. The captain's eyes narrowed, and she took a step closer. What kind of problems? She asked, her voice now more intense. Ryan hesitated. The core could fail completely, he admitted. It could cause an explosion, or worse, the entire ship could lose power. The captain's expression softened for just a moment, but then she quickly regained her composure. "You should have told me sooner," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I can't afford to have this ship fail. It's the only thing that's keeping us alive right now." Ryan nodded. "I understand. I was just trying to avoid causing panic." She studied him for a moment, her eyes piercing. "You don't need to worry about me," she said softly. "I can handle whatever comes our way." Ryan felt a strange sense of relief. The captain didn't seem upset, but there was a new tension between them. She was more than just a leader. She was someone who had lived through countless battles, someone who had been alone for far too long. And now here she was, relying on him to fix her ship, her only hope of survival. "You can help me, right?" Ryan asked, turning back to the core. He was already deep into the repair, but there were still some components he couldn't handle on his own. The captain stepped forward without hesitation. "I can help," she said simply. Together they worked in silence, the captain using her knowledge of the ship's systems to guide Ryan through the most delicate parts of the repair. It was strange working side by side with her. There was no tension, no hostility, just an understanding that they had a job to do and they had to do it well. As they finished the last adjustments, Ryan let out a sigh of relief. The core was stable now, its energy readings normal. The ship was fixed. For a moment they stood, In silence, the hum of the power core the only sound in the room. "You did well," the captain said, her voice quiet. "Thank you." Ryan nodded, feeling a mix of pride and exhaustion. "We did it." The captain stepped back, her expression unreadable. But there was something in her eyes, something softer than before, something that made Ryan wonder if their bond had grown stronger in the process of fixing the ship. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to survive this. Together. Ryan wiped the sweat from his brow, standing back to admire the newly repaired power core. The ship's systems hummed steadily, the once silent room now filled with the soft, rhythmic pulse of energy coursing through the ship. Everything seemed to be back in working order. But as he turned around to check on the captain, he realized something. She had been standing quietly by his side, watching his every move. For the first time since they had begun working together, there was a shift in the air. It wasn't just the hum of the machinery anymore. There was a subtle tension between them that Ryan couldn't ignore. The captain had been quiet ever since they finished repairing the core. She had helped him with the most delicate parts, offering a steady hand when needed, but there had been no words exchanged after the work was done. It was as if something unsaid lingered in the room, like a question that had been left hanging, in the air. Ryan couldn't help but wonder what she was thinking. She wasn't the kind of person who spoke a lot, but her presence alone was enough to make him feel the weight of her thoughts. Her eyes, always intense and watchful, seemed to pierce through him, as if she could see straight into his mind. "Is it finished?" she asked, breaking the silence at last. Ryan nodded, still unsure how to respond. "Yeah, everything's working now. The ship's stable." She didn't smile, but her expression softened, just slightly. "Good. We can leave this moon behind. Then?" There was a finality in her words that made Ryan pause. He wasn't sure if she was relieved to be leaving or if it was something else. But as he looked at her, he realized there was more to her than just a captain. There was a quiet strength in her that had drawn him in ever since they first met. He couldn't quite place it. But the more time he spent with her, the more he felt a pull, an unspoken connection that he hadn't expected. There was a vulnerability to her that he hadn't seen in any other alien, a hint of sadness hidden behind her intense gaze. It made him wonder about her past, about the burdens she carried as the leader of a stranded crew. Ryan felt a strange mixture of admiration and confusion. He wasn't sure if he was just imagining things or if there really was something more between them. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he knew about her. She was a mystery, and he was starting to feel like he wanted to unravel it. They stood there for a moment, neither of them speaking, the hum of the ship's systems filling the quiet space between them. Ryan couldn't help but feel the weight of her silence, but he didn't know how to break it. The connection they shared was still fragile, and he didn't want to risk shattering it with the wrong words. Finally, the captain stepped forward, her violet eyes never leaving his. "I've been alone for a long time," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Ryan blinked, surprised by her sudden confession. He had always assumed she was a strong, unshakable leader, someone who didn't let anything get to her, but now he saw a different side of her, one that was vulnerable just like him. "I've lost so many," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "My people, my crew, they're all gone. I'm the last of my kind." Ryan's heart tightened at the words. He hadn't realized the weight of her loneliness, the isolation that came with being the last survivor of an entire species. His mind raced, trying to find the right words to say, but nothing seemed adequate. "I'm sorry," he said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "I didn't know." The captain nodded, her expression softening just slightly. "Most people don't. But it's not something I can forget. It's always there in the back of my mind, the pain, the loss." Ryan stepped closer, his instincts telling him to offer some kind of comfort, but he wasn't sure how. He didn't know what it was like to lose everything, to be the last of your kind. All he could offer was his presence, his understanding. "I don't know what it's like to lose everything," he said quietly, "but I know what it's like to feel alone, to feel like there's no one else who understands. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face, as if she were trying to gauge whether or not he was being truthful. Ryan didn't look away. He wanted her to know that he understood. Even if he couldn't fully comprehend her pain, the captain seemed to study him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she reached out, placing a hand on his arm. The touch was gentle, almost tentative, but it was enough to send a shiver down Ryan's spine. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For staying with me. For helping me." Ryan didn't know what to say, but he nodded. He didn't need to say anything, the gesture was enough. In that moment, something shifted between them, a quiet understanding passing between them without the need for words. They stood there for a while, the silence now comfortable, not awkward. It was as though they had both found a small piece of peace in the chaos of their lives. Finally, the captain broke the silence once more. "We're ready to leave," she said, her tone steady. "Let's get this ship back on course." Ryan nodded, grateful for the change in subject. They both had a job to do, and the ship needed to get back into space. But as they worked together, Ryan couldn't help but feel that something had changed. He wasn't just fixing a ship anymore, he was helping her. And in some small way, she was helping him too. As the ship's systems powered up and the engines hummed to life, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that this journey was just beginning. Not just for the ship, but for him and the captain as, well, they had both been alone for far too long, but maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to be anymore. The ship had fully powered up, its systems humming with energy once again. The vibrations of the engine running through the floors felt like a small victory, and for a moment, Ryan allowed himself to relax. The ship was ready to leave the dead moon behind and venture out into space once again. But as the captain stood beside him, her presence felt heavier than the ship's engines ever could. Ryan glanced at the captain as she stood near the command console, her back straight and her face unreadable. She had been quiet for the most part, but Ryan knew she was processing everything that had happened since they began working together. He was no longer just a technician fixing a broken ship. He had become a part of her journey, and that was something he wasn't sure he was ready for. They had both worked in silence for the last few hours, preparing the ship for takeoff. Ryan focused on the final adjustments, but the tension between them was palpable. There was a connection, something deeper than just a shared task. It wasn't something either of them had acknowledged directly, but it lingered in the air, like an unspoken promise. As he finished securing the last of the systems, Ryan turned to face the captain. She was still standing by the console, staring out into space through the ship's viewing window. The pale light of distant stars reflected off her face, giving her an almost otherworldly appearance. "You should get some rest," Ryan suggested, his voice soft. "The repairs are finished. The ship's good to go." The captain didn't turn to face him, but her shoulders relaxed just a little. "I don't need rest," she said, her voice steady but tinged with something Ryan couldn't quite place. Ryan took a step closer. "You've been through a lot. We both have." She finally turned to look at him, her violet eyes locking onto his. For the first time, there was no mask, no walls between them. It was just her, vulnerable in a way she hadn't been before. "You don't understand," she said, her voice quiet but filled with emotion. "I've lost everything." Ryan's chest tightened at the words. He had suspected as much, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel more real, more painful. The captain was the last of her kind, the leader of a dying race. He had noticed her loneliness in the way she carried herself, the way she kept her distance from everyone, even from him. But now, in this moment, it seemed like the weight of her grief had finally caught up with her. She wasn't just a strong leader. She was a woman who had lost everything and was now trying to survive in a galaxy that no longer had a place for her. "I didn't choose this," the captain continued, her voice shaky. "I didn't ask to be the last one left. I didn't ask to be responsible for a crew I couldn't save. And now I'm alone." Ryan stepped forward, his hand resting on the edge of the console. He wanted to say something, anything, to comfort her, but the words didn't come easily. What could he say to someone who had lost everything? What words could possibly make it better? "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The captain shook her head. "You don't need to apologize," she said, her voice growing stronger. I don't know how to keep going." "How do you keep going when everyone you've ever known is gone?" Ryan understood that feeling more than she realized. He had lost people too. Not in the same way, but in a way that still haunted him. The people he loved were far away, and he hadn't seen them in years, but this was different. The captain was the last of her species, the last link to a history and a culture that had been wiped out. "You keep going because you have no choice," Ryan said softly. "You survive because that's what we do. Even when it feels like everything is falling apart, you keep moving forward." The captain's gaze softened and she took a step closer to him. Her eyes never left his, and for a moment, there was no distance between them, no alien race separating them. It was just two people, connected by shared pain, standing in the quiet of a ship that had almost fallen apart. "I don't know how to do this alone anymore," she said, her voice barely audible. Ryan swallowed hard. He had no answers for her, no magic words that could take away the weight of her loss. But he did know one thing. She didn't have to do it alone. Not anymore. "You're not alone," he said firmly. "I'm here. I'll help you. We'll figure it out together." For the first time since they had met, the captain's expression softened into something that resembled hope. It was a fleeting look, but it was there, just for a moment. And in that moment, Ryan realized something that had been growing between them since the first day they met. It wasn't just about the ship or the repairs. It was about them, two people who had found each other in the middle of the galaxy's vast emptiness. "Thank you," the captain whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Ryan nodded. There was no need for more words. The understanding between them was enough. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful, filled with the quiet hum of the ship's systems as they both stood together, contemplating the journey ahead. They had both faced loss, and they had both found a way to keep going. Now they had each other. As the ship's engines powered up, preparing to leave the moon's orbit, Ryan felt a new sense of purpose. He wasn't just fixing a ship anymore. He was helping someone who had lost everything find a reason to keep moving forward. And maybe, just maybe, he had found a reason to keep going too. The ship's engines hummed steadily as it lifted off from the barren moon's surface, leaving the desolate landscape behind. Ryan stood at the control panel, his fingers lightly grazing the smooth interface as the ship slowly ascended into the black void of space. The captain was at his side, watching the stars drift past them, her eyes distant, lost in thought. The ship had been repaired, the systems were stable, and they were finally leaving the dead moon behind. But there was still a question that lingered in the back of Ryan's mind, one that he hadn't been able to shake off since the moment they had begun working together. What now? What happened after they fixed the ship? What would happen between him and the captain? He glanced over at her, wondering if she was asking herself the same questions. She had been silent for most of the journey so far, her face a mask of focus as she adjusted the ship's course. But there was something different about her now, something softer, something more vulnerable than before. She wasn't the unshakable leader anymore. She was someone who had been through unimaginable pain and loss, and she was still standing. Ryan wasn't sure what had changed, but something between them had shifted. The repairs had been just the beginning. They had worked together side by side, facing the challenges of the damaged ship and the unknowns of the deep space. But the real challenge now was what lay ahead. The captain turned to him, her violet eyes meeting his for the first time in a while. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if they were both waiting for something, some kind of signal to guide them forward. "You've done more than just fix a ship," she said quietly, her voice soft, yet filled with weight. "You've helped me in ways I can't even explain." Ryan felt a pang of surprise at her words. She had always been so composed, so distant, but now there was a sense of vulnerability in her voice that he hadn't expected. He wasn't sure what to say, but he knew that this was important. This was the moment where they had to decide what came next. "I only did what needed to be done," he replied, keeping his voice steady. He didn't want to make her feel like he was doing this for some kind of reward. He had helped because it felt right, not because he was expecting anything in return. "But I'm glad I could help." The captain nodded slowly, her gaze lingering on him for a moment before she turned back to the view of the stars outside. "I don't know what to do next," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been alone for so long. I've lost everything. And now, I don't know what's left." Ryan felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had seen the way she had carried herself, a strong leader, unwavering in her purpose. But beneath that strength was a woman who had been through more than anyone should have to endure. She had lost her people, her crew, and now she was left with a ship, a mission, and a galaxy that seemed so vast and cold. Ryan didn't know how to fix that. He couldn't take away her pain, couldn't bring back what she had lost, but he could be there. He could be a part of what came next, whatever that might be. "You don't have to do it alone," Ryan said, his voice firm but gentle. "I'm here, if you want me to be." The captain looked at him again, her violet eyes softening just a little. "But what about you?" she asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. "What about your own life? You didn't sign up for this. You didn't sign up to be stuck on a ship with a broken crew and a lost captain." Ryan took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. "I don't know where this journey is going," he said slowly. "But I know that it's not just about fixing things. It's about finding something. Something that makes it all worth it, and maybe for me that's being here. With you." The captain didn't answer immediately, but she didn't look away either. She studied him, her gaze intense as if she were weighing his words, trying to make sense of them. For a moment Ryan felt exposed, like she could see through him, into the parts of himself he hadn't even fully understood. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded. Maybe we don't need all the answers right now," she said, her voice a little steadier. "Maybe we just need to take things one step at a time." Ryan felt a rush of relief, though he wasn't sure why. There was no clear plan, no roadmap for what was to come. They were both adrift, uncertain of what lay ahead. But in that moment, with the stars stretching out before them, Ryan realized that maybe it didn't matter. They didn't need all the answers right away. All they needed was the willingness to face whatever came next, together. "I can live with that," Ryan said with a small smile. "One step at a time." The captain returned his smile, her lips curling up in a way that was rare but real. It was the first time he had seen her look even remotely at peace. And though the journey ahead would be uncertain and full of challenges, for the first time, Ryan didn't feel so alone. They stood together, side by side, looking out at the vastness of space. The silence between them wasn't heavy or awkward. It was a quiet understanding, a bond forged in the heat of repairs and the shared weight of loneliness. For the first time in a long time, neither of them felt completely lost. The captain turned back to the controls, her hand resting gently on the console. "Let's go then," she said, her voice steady once again. "Let's see where this journey takes us." Ryan nodded and stepped back to his station, his hands instinctively returning to the familiar controls. He didn't know where they were going, but for the first time, he didn't need to. The future was uncertain, but it was something they would face together. And as the ship moved further into the unknown, Ryan realized that the repair of the ship had been just the beginning. The real work, the real journey, was just starting. And for the first time in a long time, he was ready for it.